Hi, and welcome to another episode of our tutorial series on internal traffic encryption using self-signed certificate. In this episode, I will show you how to deploy ECS Fargate service where each task contains two containers, one hosting the actual application and another one will be hosting a proxy, a so-called sidecar container. If you remember in the previous episode, we have created our VPC and configured its traffic to make it ready for deploying the actual service. So where will the service sit in this diagram? Picture it this way. We'll be deploying our ECS service across our private subnets, and then the tasks will be pulling Docker images from the AWS Elastic Container Repository. Simple, right? So let's get right to it. So let's start with creating repositories for our Docker images. As I mentioned, we're going to have two containers, so let's create a repo for each. Let's start with an application, so we're going to call it app. Let's keep it as mutable and let's enable scan and push to keep it secure. And now let's do the same for our sidecar container image. We're going to call it proxy. So the next step is to create our ECS Fargate cluster. So let's navigate to the ECS page. Go to clusters, create cluster. Let's give it a name. We want to keep it as Fargate. And let's switch on container insights in case we need to debug our application. It should take a minute or two to create the cluster. So our cluster is ready. Can we deploy the service now? Not yet, a couple of steps still missing. First of all, we need to create task definition where we will be describing the tasks and its contents. And before we do that, we need to create an IAM role that will be used as an ECS execution role. So let's start with that. Okay, so let's go to the IAM page. Click on create role. Now let's find our ECS service. Here it is. Let's choose the ECS task. Now, what would be our permissions policy? It should be Amazon ECS task execution role policy. That's the one. Next, let's give it a name, something simple. Trust policy looks like just something that we need, and that will do. Right, we are finally ready to create a task definition. So let's go back to the ECS. And click on task definitions. Create new task definition. So let's give it a name. We want to keep it as an AWS Fargate launch type. These settings are fine for demo purposes. We don't need a task role because our app is very simple. Let's add our task execution role that we created a couple of minutes ago. Aha, container definitions. That's the most interesting part. So let's start with our proxy container first. Let's call it Envoy, because we're going to use an Envoy image for our proxy container. And now we need to go and image URI. If you remember, we're keeping it in the ECR repository. So let's navigate there and copy the URL for it. It is essential container, yes. And because remember, the traffic from the load balancer to the proxy will be encrypted, we would want to use port 443. Okay, this is fine for now. Yes, yes, we want to keep logging. This is all brilliant. Right, so let's do the same for our app container. Let's call it a service. The image URI would be something like this for me. Yes, absolutely, it is an essential container. And we want to collect logs from it, of course. That should be enough for now. Let's create it. So, we have our ECS cluster, we have our task definition, we have our IAM execution role. So, it's time to create our service. Let's do it. Let's go back to the cluster. And then under the Services tab, let's click on Create. Let's pick the family. We have only one definition so far, but I have to have many more. The service name is not particularly user-friendly, so let's change it to something cool like test service. Launch type is Fargate, and let's have 2 tasks. We don't need that. Don't forget to change the VPC from the default to the one we created earlier. And as discussed, we wanted to keep it in the private subnets. So let's remove all public ones. Here's another thing that is missing, security group. We're not going to create it now, we'll create it later, and I'll explain you why. And we don't need a public IP because it will be located in the private subnets. Later on, we'll have to use load balancing as well, but because we have not created our load balancer yet, let's keep it empty for now. And that is it. Let's create it. It will take a few minutes, so let's go get our coffee. Alright, so our service is deployed. Don't get excited yet, we still have some configuration errors, but it will all be fixed in our next episodes after we deploy and configure our load balancer. So thank you for watching. See you soon.